Hi, everyone. This is the first podcast of Angel Nears, the community of startup builders based in Silicon Valley. I'm your host, Oleg Kujikov, and our guest today is Leonid Igolnik, a software engineer with a career spanning 20 years and a number of different technology companies, which include two unicorns, Taleo and Signal FX. He's also an advisor and an angel investor in numerous startups in the Bay Area. We're excited to have Leonid join us today to share his experiences on what it takes for a new product to win. Leonid, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for the welcome. I think calling me an engineer is a bit of an overstatement at this stage of my career, if especially if you ask my own engineering teams. But once I've started my career building software hands-on, it's been a while since I wrote a code, any code for commercial applications, but certainly been around some products that were fortunate enough to make a dent in their respective markets, and hopefully we'll be able to share some of the insights that we've learned over the years.
Well, it does say on LinkedIn that you have experience as an engineer, and as we all know, you can't lie on there. So I'm just going to stick with it. But but for the listeners, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself to get us started?
So I've been fortunate enough to be at the right place at the right time several times. Although some of my friends say that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Started building enterprise software in late '90s and started delivering it over the web browser, which was a thing at the time before this term was coined. The term SaaS was coined.
Mhm.
And has seen the industry evolve from this is like an experiment that will never go anywhere, to run a platform team at the second largest domain registrar in the world. And then 15 years ago, when I moved to the Valley, joined a small HR software startup. The decade of 2000 to 2010 was a bit of a revolution in HR software
Mhm.
delivered online. The startup got acquired by Taleo, which was one of the four largest independent SaaS companies of its time. So it was us. So interestingly enough, another HR software company called SuccessFactors, and then Salesforce.com, which was probably the most known example, started in '99, uh, and Concur. Three of those have since been acquired. Concur and SuccessFactors was SAP, Teleos was Oracle, and most had few other stints since then, including started doing angel investment just to kind of diversify my perspective on the technology world right after the Taleo was acquired by Oracle, and have been doing this since 2012, so about 8 years now, with various degrees of success, some great exits, some great write-offs. Comes with the territory. I think for me as an engineer, the interesting part of this was the angel investment part of my journey was for a while cheaper than a good MBA, and that has been tremendously helpful to broaden my horizons. Because even as a professional, I started thinking about how I spend my time differently. And then most recently, joined a company called Signal Effects in 2018. We were building a third generation monitoring tools for applications and infrastructure, and the market was going through a fundamental changes due to some of the developments in how software is being architected. Had a great run there with some great investors, and the company recently exited to Splunk for $1.05 billion. And we had a great journey there as well because, like a lot of other enterprise companies, over time we had to shift from best of breed. We had to build our first, second product. We had to scale. We had to define some differentiated capabilities in a market that is already existing, and in an existing market. And I guess that's one of the things we're going to be talking about today. If you want to win, you have to be different. You have to be substantially different, and depending on the market, sometimes 10 times different to change the behavior. And that's what we were doing at Signal FX as well. We were fortunate enough to have some really great customers, some brand names people will recognize, companies like Stripe, Yelp, Atlassian, and helping them run their online operating environments and help them scale their businesses.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you on. You have a wealth of experience, and you've been at several different companies. I guess my first question I'd like to ask for the young entrepreneurs out there, like, what are your key learnings when it comes to building a new product?
I think the most difficult thing about building a product in general, new or existing, is how do you prioritize your time, and what is that you build? How do you decide what do you need to build to be successful? I remember a number of conversations with my early in career engineers that were really concerned that we're going to run out of product requirements at some point. And I've never been in that situation where the product roadmap is not longer than the ability of the engineering team by an order or two of magnitudes, right? So there's always stuff to build. So the question really becomes is how do you take that limited capacity, which is your ability to develop product, right, and
Hmm.
allocate it to the right things? And like broadly, right, you have the buckets of keeping the lights on, right? We if it's not a new product, it's an existing product, and over time that bucket of keeping the lights on goes from zero to about 30% of your investment on average. And then how do you serve your existing customers, and how do you open up new opportunities for yourself, like in those three buckets? And obviously the mix of those three buckets will change over the lifespan of a company. You obviously focusing on new and exciting things earlier on. Over time, as you gain customers, you have to serve them, and continue to broaden your product capabilities to open up opportunities on the market so you can sell more software. And obviously, the third bucket of keeping the lights on continues to kind of increase as you mature and as the company matures. So the interesting parts for me is in this never-ending long laundry list of things to build. How do you build the most impactful things, and how do you build the things without which you cannot survive, right? And I think developing a process and a methodology that allows you to focus on those. And some folks are lucky, and some folks just stumble into those intuitively. But one of the questions that I always wanted to answer over time is how do you do this reliably? What are some of the more repeatable, reliable methods of identifying those things? And that's what I have seen separate the most successful companies probably from the less successful ones.
Yes. So you've talked about what it comes to what it takes to build a product, but really what I want to ask is like, what patterns have you seen between these companies that carry? So do you have any examples of like through lines that you've seen at all of your companies, or does every company have a different process that it needs to succeed?
I think the processes are different, and they have to be tailored to the nature of the company, the nature of the market, the capability of the organization. But there are some common themes that emerge, right? Being customer driven, being allowing customers to validate your assumptions seems to be one of the common themes, and iterating rapidly on those assumptions, especially if you're in the market that evolved fairly rapidly as well. Like we live in a day and age where famously, I think it's Mark Benioff who said, "Every company is a software company. Software is eating the world." Right.
Hmm.
So there's a tremendous amount of change in every single market for every single company that are transforming themselves and whose customers are transforming themselves as well, and therefore being responsive to what the customer needs and making sure that you build exactly what the customer wants is one of those themes. And the question then becomes how do you find those things that the customers needs, because quite often the customers will not tell you what they need in a way that you can act on it. The worst
Right.
thing to do is to let your customer say, can you build a widget A or widget B for me? At least when it comes to software products, the more reliable way that I have seen this type of problems addressed across the companies I've been with and several others is repeatably and reliably identifying the durable problems to solve. And it's very rare that the customer comes to you and tells you, here's my problem, right?
Hmm.
They tend to talk to you about solutions. Unfortunately, those solutions are not always broadly applicable, because the customer is thinking about their own use cases as opposed to the use cases of the entire market, right?
Hmm.
The famous saying, either truth or not, attributed or misattributed to Henry Ford, is if I was asking my customers what they need, I would build them a faster horse, not a car, right?
Right.
So the question then becomes, how do you identify those durable needs and the durable problems that you want to solve, and then figure out the right solution that that creates this problem. And ideally, and again, car versus horse is a great example. How do you find those solutions that are 10 times better than the alternative? Because there's a lot of research out there that says that if you want to change somebody's behavior, right, you have to be 10 times better than the alternative. Because in general, we as humans are very difficult to change behaviors, right? For example, one of the reasons New Year resolutions mostly fail. We say we will change our behavior, but we don't unless something really drags us in. And this nature of discovering solutions that are 10 times better than the alternatives require a very deep, very intuitive understanding of the problem you're trying to solve.
So, how do you determine like what those most important features are that the customer needs and not necessarily what they want? And then to add on to that is does it change throughout the life cycle of a company? Like does that change as you go from a relatively new startup to a established enterprise company?
So I think it's less about whether you're a startup or an established company. It's probably more about whether you are playing in a new market or an established market, right? There's this concept of sustaining innovation or disruptive innovation. Like maybe
Hmm.
let's use a couple examples. I would argue that when ride-sharing companies took off, right, Uber, Lyft, and others, this was disruptive innovation because they were solving the durable problem of getting me, the individual, from point A to point B in a way that was 10 times more efficient. And in several examples, I tend to travel a lot. So it's efficient in a way of me being in a foreign country, not having to hunt for the number to call the local cab company or try to explain to a cab driver where is that I am in the city that I've never been to before and where to
Hmm.
find and pick me up, right?
Right.
So the disruption here is leveraging trends, which is the desire of people to move from point A to point B, combined with kind of ubiquitous penetration of mobile devices with accurate GPS, to create an experience that solves the durable problem of I need to get from point A to point B in a way that is more efficient, right? And that's one of the reasons, like I don't think Uber wants they want me at least as a customer, or Lyft wants they want another customer are unlikely to lose to their direct competitors, because when you compare them together, right, they're not necessarily 10 times better, and they now in the stage of what I would call sustaining innovation. For example, if you see, they started with basic ride sharing, but then Uber Pool and Lyft Share, I think it's called, showed up. Some additional incremental services started to show up that further improve the product, but none of them, unless you have a very specific use case, convince you to switch between the products. Right now, that's a good example of sustaining or innovation. Right. So I think the way companies need to think about what they do and how they think about it's not about the size. It's more about the maturity of the market or what other external forces may drive a change in the market.
Hmm.
Signal effects was a good example where the way software was being architected, and since we're talking about engineering a bit, right, adoption of microservices, adoption of containers, adoption of Kubernetes over the last couple of years made applications completely different in their nature of how they deploy, how ephemeral they are, how they scale up and down compared to traditional enterprise software that was built 10, 15 years ago. And therefore you needed a new tool, right? That's an example of a disruptive innovation in an existing market because you needed a fundamentally different tool. And companies like SignalFX, Datadog, Honeycomb, and Stunner were capitalizing on that trend, disrupting existing players on the market.
Mhm.
So it's not really about the size. Maybe to sum this up, it's about the external, or what's going on in the market, and what do you have to do to be better than the alternative.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, addressing the market is something I think all entrepreneurs are aware of, but to make it your focus, it's difficult, especially when the feedback is kind of it's hard to sift through the feedback from customers and maybe figure out like what they really need versus what they want. As a young entrepreneur, how would you approach designing the features of your product so that it has the best chance to succeed, like a winning feature set?
So for me, thinking about the features and the capabilities of the offering has two categories. understanding what needs to be done, and methodically arriving to that understanding. And maybe we'll start with the and then go to the beginning.
Sure.
There's the great research that was done by Dr. Nariaki Kanot of one of the Japanese universities that talks about customer satisfaction derived from how well the feature is implemented or what features exist in the product. And if you look at the research, and there's a great Wikipedia article on the subject, you will see that any capability of the product can be classified into one of three categories, right? You have your basic expectations, and maybe let's use a car, since most of us are familiar with cars as a good example. Like your brakes on the car are typically basic expectations, right? When they
Hmm.
work well, you rarely go to your friends after buying a new car and saying, you know what, those brakes that on the car they just bought there, that's like freaking amazing, right?
Right.
They're brakes. Now, when they work, you don't get too excited by them, but when they stop working, you get very rapidly dissatisfied, right?
Right. So it's kind of
So
a
when
must-have.
you build the product, you have to identify those basic expectations, because without them, you're just not going to sell a car, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Then you have the set of features that are called linear satisfiers, right? And those linear satisfiers, or the satisfiers, are they increase with the customer satisfaction, but they do so linearly. So things like the range of Tesla, right? Like in the range of electric car, the gas mileage. In some cases, for some people, the acceleration, perhaps, right? Those would be considered satisfiers, and you need to have just enough of them. But that's typically not why customers get excited about your product. And like, I'll give you an example. The acceleration can be an exciter, which is the third category of features, of which we'll talk about that. Like when Tesla first released some of their cars, right?
The
The crazy
Roadster.
mode. Well, no. Even the Model 3 has this mode called the ridiculous mode, or whatever they call it, where the acceleration is just out of the roof. Like for some
Oh,
people, it's an
oh, it's like
exciter.
insane mode or something. Yeah, I've
Insane
heard
mode.
of
Yeah,
it.
that's right.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's the third category of features, and I describe them as things you didn't know you needed, right? And they're called the exciters. And
Mm.
the exciters and this is where the innovation has to differ by time. Like many years ago, in my first car, having remote control and power windows, power locks used to be exciters, right? The interesting things about exciters, or like in Tesla, autopilot is probably an example of a good exciter today, right?
Hmm.
Airbags or used to be exciters. The interesting thing about exciters in every market, that over time they become basic expectations, right?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
you have to discover the exciters that are relevant to you, to your customers today. I.e., what are the problems that you can solve for them, that you didn't know they didn't know they needed, but they will create that excitement. And maybe I'll use one other example from the car industry. Ford, I believe, was the first car company that created this capability that allowed you to approach your car, bump the rear bumper with your foot, and have the trunk open.
Hmm.
I bet you a lot of money that no Ford driver or no car driver that drives a car went to Ford and says, you know what? If you build this, I will buy this, and this is freaking amazing, right? So the
Right.
question should be, and this is a good example of an exciter, because it's a really useful feature when you leave a grocery store with hands full of bags and you approach your car, right?
Sure.
Or if you
Especially
have a
during
kid,
coronavirus outbreak.
that's right. Or if you're getting a kid out of a stroller, right? And
Hmm.
your hands are busy. So the question then becomes, and if you build a new product, is how do you find those exciters, right? And how do you find those reliably, so you can incorporate them into your product?
Hmm.
And the only way I have seen work reliably is observing your end users, or your customers,
Hmm.
in what I call their natural habitat. Right? You have to go and interview them. Now, if you have a bit more resources, when I say interview them, you actually fly out with professional ethnographic researchers, and you go visit them in their workplace, and you understand how they do their job every day. But you don't have to spend that much money. And this approach of ethnographic research for product definition was pioneered by a gentleman by the name of Alan Cooper, coincidentally an author of the book called The Inmates Running the Asylum, also running a consultancy here in the Bay Area called Cooper Design, and that's what they specialize on. They help larger customers, because research like that is fairly expensive, um, discover those durable issues, right? And for example, to discover a durable issue of having to build the capability to open the trunk, you probably have to go and observe your customers. And when I say in their natural habitat, is you have to go to a parking lot of a grocery store and just watch them. You discover that there's a durable problem with opening a trunk. And maybe it's easier and more intuitive to discover for somebody because we all drive cars, or most of us do. uh, but you can only do it by observing the customers in their natural habitat, right? And
Mm.
understanding what is that they're trying to achieve. Because asking them about this, like, it's pointless. You don't think about this as a capability of your car, right?
Mhm.
I remember personally, again, going back to cars, I didn't think I needed a car without that had a key that I didn't need to take out of my pocket. Absolutely didn't think I cared about that feature. I don't think I want a car without it now, right?
Right. It's not totally necessary. Why would you think you need it?
But it is incredibly convenient if you think about it,
Yeah.
right? So going back to the question is, how do you discover this, right? You have to go and interview your customers, and you have to interview them the right way. And the biggest mistake I've seen, both mature companies and young entrepreneurs try to interview their prospective customers, is ask them questions about the future. And this goes back to the conversation um, we had of customers don't change their behavior, and therefore asking them, would you use a feature, is a pointless question, because if it sounds good, the answer is yes, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
will they? You never know. So the more useful questions to ask is to ask about what problems do they have today and how do they solve them today, which allows you to discover the problem, not necessarily the solution. So I'll give you an example. I was working with some of my colleagues on a service desk application that kind of gets deployed to call centers. And we were walking through a call center, and in the call center, we've noticed one of the observations we made is some people had a piece of paper glued to their phone. Right? And we're like, well, what's this paper? What is this for? Oh, that's just a list of our VIP end users. If they call, we give them a better treatment. Why don't we? Why don't we have VIP end user capability in our software, so you can just flag the user VIP, right? And this is the kind of durable problem you can only discover by being in a natural habitat.
Mm.
The other kind of useful questions to ask is, if you had a time or money to hire an assistant, what would you have your assistant do, right?
Mhm.
Like, what problem that you have today would you delegate to your assistant? And there's a list that we can share, but those are the kind of questions you want to ask or observe them in their natural habitat to discover their problems. And there's maybe one other area of this topic. There's a very famous story about how this observation by a design company called Luna Design, caused Oral-B to redesign a toothbrush. Those of you that are old enough probably remember that toothbrushes used to be those skinny little things that are very difficult to hold, right? And Oral-B at some point hired Luna Design to go and see if they can redesign the brush. And Luna observed the end users of toothbrushes, which we all use, and realized that there are three primary ways people hold a toothbrush. There's a desk grip, which like you hold it in your entire fist, and the two others which escape me right now. But the interesting thing is, none of those ways of in the way people are normally holding the toothbrush allowed them to hold a skinny toothbrush comfortable. So the solution was pretty obvious, and we all know it now. And that's how most toothbrushes right now, those thick, relieved, with a nice grip toothbrushes that are much easier to hold in your hand. There's a funny story also that the toothbrush almost didn't launch because it wouldn't fit any of the toothbrush holders of its day. The holes were too small, so they also had to go redesign a holder for that. But it's an example, and you think toothbrush, like it's a $2 item. How much money can you make? if I remember the numbers correctly, Oral B's market share increased by like 6-7% when they relaunched the toothbrush, like the famous Oral B toothbrush. And in that market, that was tens of millions of dollars of difference just by building a product that is 10 times better, easier to use for your customers. And I bet you any money that none of their customers will tell you, you know what, the problem with my toothbrush, it's too skinny, it's uncomfortable to handle.
Of course not. Okay, so it sounds like in order to choose the best features to focus on, it takes real feet on the ground and observation of your customer base to understand like the problems that they face, and not necessarily asking them because you're not going to get the best answer.
Asking them, well, let's caveat that asking them, but asking them about the problems, not about the solution. The job of the product company is to go find the best solution to the most durable problems you are facing across your customers, right? And that's what separates, in my mind, the companies that win, right?
Hmm.
Because they naturally tend to build services that generate excitement in their user base, and that excitement in consumer market translate into something called virality, right? Where you want to go tell everybody about the thing that you just built. But in other products, the exciters tend to be the capabilities that make your customers referenceable and make them want to tell all of their professional colleagues about this thing that they just bought, right? Sometimes for
Hmm.
millions of dollars, that just saves them a lot of interesting features. Now, obviously, the way you think about market validation in the consumer market and the enterprise market is probably different. And I won't speak about the consumer market much just because I haven't spent a lot of time there. But there are some commonalities. So measuring usage, measuring
Hmm.
engagement, understanding the feedback and having the feedback loop, and ideally rapid feedback loop in things like beta software releases, early adopter programs, and getting feedback early from your target customer is important. And obviously, longer term, measuring the engagement with a feature, right? Some of the more important, more common techniques across both markets. And there are now products that are emerging that give you those types of user analytics. I think some of the older generations for mobile were things like Mixpanel, Heap, Launch Darkly, which allows you to do some basic A/B testing, which is also a more that type of experimentation in a consumer market is also a bit more prevalent, right? Because it's tougher to interview your end users than in a well-defined B2B market. But there are some of the techniques are fairly common.
Yeah, I mean, some of the examples we've talked about, such as the toothbrush, Oral B, and Ford, they these are solutions for business to consumer products. But I think what you're saying is those techniques apply in business to business markets, in SaaS startups, across industries. All of these trends kind of continue.
Absolutely. Not only they apply to defining the product, certainly in a B2B market, they also apply in your ability to message better and sell the product better
Hmm.
because it allows you through this research to develop this deeper understanding of your customer and specifically of your end user. Because in a B2B dynamic, there's the buyer
Hmm.
who is not always the end user of the product, right? There's the decision maker and the budget holder who is not always the end user of the product. Like, for example, CRM software is bought by VP of sale,
Hmm.
but every single sales rep has to use it, right?
Right.
But what this level of research and this approach to feature discovery allows you to do is also to develop an intimate understanding of your customer, which you can also later on use to translate into sales messaging, right? And I'll give you an
Hmm.
example. I recently was about helping a legal tech company get off the ground, and they're applying statistical models, natural language processing, and some other modern machine learning techniques to allow attorneys to speed up contract negotiation or what's called redlining, right?
Hmm.
And through about 40 interviews that we've conducted with attorneys, VPs of sales, contract negotiations, and you need to have a fairly diverse set of your interviewees in your target group because you want to get a 360 picture. We've discovered a lot of useful and durable one liners that we now use in our sales messaging.
Okay,
Like, for
let's hear it.
example, we've learned in contract negotiation, every company starts from a template contract, right?
Mhm.
There's a standard starting point for every contract, but every company over time has to go and evolve the standard contract as the market dynamics evolve, as norms evolve, as possibly new legal framework shows up. And we've learned that today, most in-house corporate law teams don't have any data that tells them which portions of the contract is the most contentious one in their negotiations. Which ones do they have to tend to negotiate and always give up on, right? Which would be a logical place to go and make it part of your template. We found that through methodical conversation about the kind of problems they have with and how they think about working with their contract and working templates. And now the solution that we're applying to the problem is tracking changes and starting to highlight almost like a heat map over the contract as, hey, listen, this clause of liability or this clause of your data privacy, you always tend to negotiate and you always tend to give up. And most of the time you give up to this language. Maybe to speed up the sales process, you should change your contract, right? Here's an example of discovering a durable problem and creating a solution that allows the customer to do something with the data the product inherently already has. And we if we were asking our attorneys that we were interviewing, like what do you need from a product like ours, I don't think this would have come out as a feature that they need, right?
Yeah, no. So when you're talking about market needs, I'm wondering, should startups focus on the exciters that you mentioned, or is there another approach? And to add on, how do you determine something's an exciter that's gonna really blow up in the market that people really want?
So I think number one, you have to focus on the basic needs, right? If you don't satisfy the basic needs, with obviously exception to every rule, you're not going to sell a product,
Hmm.
right? If you don't meet the basic security requirements or the basic availability requirements, and they will differ market by market, right? For example, a monitoring system cannot have an uptime of 3 nines, right? That's like, if your monitoring system is not up, you cannot monitor other things that have to have uptime. So the basic need for monitoring system, for example, you don't take any maintenance windows. You cannot shut down the product for maintenance because when you do, your customers are flying blind, right?
Right,
In other places, like when you're running a CRM, well, maybe it's okay to shut down CRM for an hour in the middle of the night when nobody uses it.
right.
So you need to have your basic needs. The linear satisfiers that we talked about, like the range of your car, are useful sometimes to close a certain type of deal because you may need to meet certain performance characteristics of your product, but you should have just enough of them and no more than that to
Mm,
continue to close business.
mm,
And for me, the goal is to focus on the exciters, right? If we talk about changing behaviors as hard, and therefore you have to be 10 times better than the alternative, it's the exciters that make you 10 times better.
mhm.
And how do you find those exciters, or how do you determine that they will be exciters? For me, the methodical process is you have to go and understand the durable problems that the customers have today that are not solved by the alternative solutions. Number one, like an example of, well, let's go back to cars again. The example of a durable problem being I need to open my trunk with both of my hands occupied, and then find a solution that solves that problem really, really well.
What makes something a durable problem? Is it like a certain number of customers are facing this problem? How do you decide or determine something's durable?
So there is a bit of a more art than science in this, but yes, your durable problems are typically common themes of things that people are not thinking about, but you're hearing them. This is a problem. This what uh, prevents me from achieving my goal every day, right? And obviously, not every every capability you're going to find in your discovery will become that kind of that exciter. But every product that I've seen successful, or every product demo that I've seen successful, obviously tends to have a screen. And I once heard a talk about like designing a killer product demo that says, hey, there has to be a killer screen. That's the screen after which when the buyer sees it, the buyer goes, you know what, that's it, I want this product, right? Those killer screens or those killer features typically come out of those exciters. Which one will resonate with your market has to be achieved through experimentation. So you build a thesis and you start validating it. And the cheapest way, by the way, to validate this is after you've done your interviewing, you don't write the software first. The cheapest way to build enterprise software is not to write any software, but to start with mock-ups and prototypes,
Hmm.
right? And you do some visual mock-ups and prototypes, and you go back to some of the same people you've interviewed, and you showed them some of the problems that you identified in your conversations with them, and then you show them some of the proposed solutions. And that's your that rapid validation step we were talking about, that is absolutely required to go and validate some of your own ideas or your interpretations of what would solve this problem back with your customers.
Okay, so we've done a good job of talking about determining the needs of the market and designing your product. And you've also mentioned be 10x times better than your competitor. So next, I'd like to talk about product adoption. What do you think it takes to convince users to switch to your product, especially when you have competitors in your market?
So I'll sound a bit like a broken record. You have to be 10 times better because we're all like, if you think about
Ah,
your
I knew
end
it.
users, if you think about your end users, right, they
Yeah.
all have day jobs and lives, and they have a particular job that they want to achieve by using your product.
Hmm.
So your job is to convince them that they can achieve that job much faster and much easier with what you are offering them than any other alternatives. And by the way, other alternatives may be not using any product at all, right?
Mm,
Like
right.
let's think about like getting from point A from point B. I live in San Francisco, a reasonably densely populated city. So my options for getting from point A to point B are a car, public transport. And by the way, unfortunately, in San Francisco, in that order of preference. Then you have your ride sharing companies. And most recently, we had this prevalence of shareable bikes and electric scooters, right? We have a fairly mild climate. And all of those compete for the same opportunity to do the job. And the job I'm
Mhm.
hiring all of those tools to do is to get me from point A to point B.
Mm,
So there are times and there are cases where getting on the scooter is 10 times better than getting an Uber, right?
sure.
Traffic, like rush hour traffic in certain portions of the city, it's much easier for me, especially if it's not raining, to get 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 blocks on a scooter versus trying to wait for an Uber that may be stuck in traffic for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So here's the 10 times better capability of a scooter to convince me to spend money on that. And by the way, if you look at pricing of renting a scooter in the city and getting an Uber, they're not that far off on over a certain distance of time, right? So
Yeah.
here's an example where the durable problem or the job to be done is getting me from point A to point B, and the solutions will differ based on the context. And therefore, again, understanding my context is important.
Right. Rainy day versus a nice sunny day are two totally different situations in this case.
That's right. Do I want to be on the phone call during this commute? And maybe I'm not in a rush, and maybe I do want to be in my. And by the way, that's another good example. Um, I have chosen to drive versus taking an Uber just because I need to have a private conversation while I'm on the road, right?
Mm. Mhm.
So, convincing your end users that you are the best solution starts from empathy between you and your end user, in my mind. And that empathy can only be developed through common understanding. In some markets, for some folks, it's much easier because you can relate to yourself. And most early stage companies start in markets where the founders can relate to a durable problem, right? They're
Right.
naturally they're scratching their own niche, as they say, right? And therefore, it's very easy for them to relate to their target end users. Obviously, it gets more difficult as you scale. You start hiring sales team, and you have to impart that wisdom on your customer facing crew. So for me, in my experience, and by no means I'm a go-to-market specialist, is but this empathy gets developed through a deep understanding of your customer first,
Mhm.
and it goes back to the discovery interviews and the research you do. And once you develop that empathy, you can start recommending solutions. And if your solutions are truly 10 times better, they're going to get adopted, right?
Of course, yeah. Okay, so obviously we want to have great solutions to these kind of issues we see. But when startups are young, they can face real challenges trying to enter the market. So for those young companies, like what techniques and practices should they use to acquire their first group of users? Because not all companies start by addressing a problem, like you mentioned. A lot of people will tinker and find a solution and then build a business out of it. Some people
Yeah,
don't have
we
that
we, we,
advantage.
we we call it a pivot in Silicon Valley. Uh, it's a much more eloquent way of saying my initial idea didn't work, and we became we moved to something else. Um, there are several ways I've seen folks being successful. Number one, if and it also depends on the founding team. If the founding team is more experienced and has an existing business network, they tend to have some of their own connections that they can leverage, right, to find some of the early adopters. I just became an investor in a company that was founded by four reasonably experienced enterprise software professionals, and some of the earlier customers coming out of their existing networks, their former customers, the connections they've built over the industry. So the question is, what is a young founder to do, right? I just got out of school, or I'm an engineer with few years of experience, and this is where Silicon Valley also shines, um, because there is a lot of people. And for me, as somebody who lived in five different countries and worked professionally in three, Silicon Valley is different in one very important way: concentration of talent and ability and openness of folks to have conversations and helping each other, right? I've been in places in the world where people are very very shy about the opening up their network or helping each other, because they worry that either the idea will be stolen or they don't see a value in this. And Valley is this unique place where having a conversation and kind of serendipitously helping somebody with a connection you can make is the norm, because I think we all realize that it creates this amplification network effect. So for younger founders or for early kind of first time founders, one of the other reliable methods is find the right money. So find the right investors or angel investors, depending on the stage of the company, and use them as your network. Use their networks to plug you in. And you typically will see three sources of that network. You can get it from your angel investors, you can get it from your institutional investors. Some firms like Andreessen Horowitz is a good example, have programs for their companies, like they run EBCs, executive briefing centers, to help connect the buyer and the company. And some companies do it by taking advantage of programs like accelerators, incubator programs, or hiring or retaining advisors, right?
Mhm.
Like an example of the legal tech company, the two founders just came out of Stanford. They haven't worked professionally, didn't have the network. And in their case, most of the interviews that we've done, and they sort some of their own target uh, kind of archetypes of users to interview, just came out of my own framework, my own network, as a favor, right? It's always interesting to for somebody to get with the right messaging and the right approach. Half an hour to a 45-minute conversation about what they do can be quite interesting, and that's a very viable approach. And looking for those types of advisors that can plug you as an entrepreneur, and can also plug you into what I would call smart money. They come out of the space, or they understand the space in some way. Certainly didn't understand legal tech when I started working with the company, but I understood B2B software,
Mhm.
and kind of I've been on the end user part of contract redlining and negotiating as an executive, so I could at least relate to the problem, so we could zone in on kind of first order of magnitude of folks to talk to. And that's probably the most reliable approach, i.e., leveraging your network and asking for a favor. Sometimes cold introductions in the valley, cold pings on LinkedIn do work, but statistically speaking, a warm intro through with the right context is much more useful.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think a lot of times we underrate our networks and just how vast they can be. I mean, one connection turns into several relatively quickly, and you never really know how close help can be without leveraging those networks.
The help, at least in the valley, my experience is that the help is much closer than a lot of people realize compared to a lot of other places. And this is the consistent theme I hear from people like who came to the valley recently. I've been here for 15 years, so I'm kind of gotten used to it. I get shocked the other way around when I travel outside and I'm trying to make some connections. But this is the consistent theme I'm hearing, and that's what kind of very difficult to reproduce. And others have tried to reproduce this type of ecosystem, but it is incredibly difficult to rebuild elsewhere.
That's really interesting. Just for the listener, do you want to tell us where else you've worked outside of the Bay Area?
So professionally, I worked in Israel. That was my first job, and then I lived in Toronto in Canada for a while. And back in '05, the proverbial is now based on an HBO show saying the winter was coming, and I came down to the valley for a year, and I've been here for 15 now. So, and some of the things that kept me here, it's not the high taxes and the crappy weather in San Francisco, especially in the summer, that kept me here. It's that unique concentration of money, talent, expertise, and this approach to openness to create a force multiplier.
That's a really interesting takeaway. Um, okay, so next, I would like to ask you a little bit about storytelling and what the right way to do storytelling is for young entrepreneurs.
Storytelling is such an, in my opinion, such an undervalued and underrated skill or capability. And in my part, at the early stage of the company, it's incredibly important for two reasons. Number one, as an entrepreneur, you're trying to sell your product to your customers or your end users,
Mhm.
and you also are trying to sell your company to an investor, right? Effectively, fundraising is a sales job as well,
Hmm.
and you quite often have a very brief and very concentrated period of time to get your message across, right? The infamous elevator pitch, right? No slides, 2 minutes to tell your story.
If that, yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess it. We don't have a lot of high rises here, but the ability to effectively deliver your message once you discover the durable problems, you need to be able to articulate your understanding. And that's the next skill that I recommend every entrepreneur builds. I'll do a shameless plug here. I'm a member of this group called Sand Hill Angels. And one of the services we run at Sand Hill Angels to the community of entrepreneurs is what something we call Sand Hill Raw. It's a pitch opportunity. And believe it or not, even though we're recording this episode in the middle of shelter in place order, we still do Sand Hill Raw and all of our normal agent activities. We just do them virtually, is an ability to go pitch your company for 5 minutes. No risk. It's not an investment presentation. It's a presentation to get feedback. And you're pitching in this 5 minutes, no slides, which is the most difficult for a lot of entrepreneurs. Like there's no visual aids to tell your story. And that forces you to tell that story succinctly. And one of my favorite books, and I'm just going to cheat for a bit, I'm going to pull up the model the book recommends is on the subject. It's called Made to Stick. Made to
Hmm.
Stick is the book that teaches you this what they call the success model. Hold on a second, just so I don't screw up all the acronyms. And they tell you if you want to deliver your message, you have to do several things. It has to be simple,
Mhm.
right? Uncomplicated, because quite often you have to tell it to somebody who is in a different state of mind or not have not thought about the problem as deeply or at the moment as you did. It has to be unexpected. There's a lot of physiological and psychological research that tells you that unexpected stories tend to be more observed because our reptilian brain, once it sees a pattern it doesn't recognize, kind of interrupts your higher orders thinking, and forces the rest of your cognitive energy to go to understanding this message if something doesn't line up. So the message has to be unexpected in some way, and there are great examples of unexpected messages. There was this famous ad console message about, um, and I think it went something like, "Did you know that the popcorn you're eating at the movie theater right now has as much saturated fat as three steak dinners with fries and all the trimmings combined?"
Hmm.
Numbers seem to be true, and it is like it gets your attention, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's also successful as a message because it leverages a couple other elements of this model, and the other elements of success are being concrete, right? Ability to relate a bucket of popcorn to a steak is very concrete example. It's not an abstract, eat less popcorn. There's too much saturated fat. There's not a lot of butter. It's healthier for you not to, right?
Mhm.
It makes it credible, and you have to be credible when it comes to your messaging. And some of the more common techniques for credibility is to leverage third-party independent sources. It's not to say I think, right? It's to say we have talked to blah, and here's the data we've discovered.
Mm.
You have to be emotional, right? Emotional stories tend to be um, much easier for us to associate or attach to as humans. One of the techniques of pitching the story is this kind of day in life of your end user, right? Imagine Billy who's on call. It's middle of the night. He gets the page. What's the most important thing? What's the most important feature capability in that page? Billy wants to look at his phone and say, do I need to get out of bed or can this wait till this morning? Right? That's a durable problem that you can solve by putting the right message on that push message of your phone.
Mm.
And then one of the also viable techniques, humans in general love stories, right? For millennia, we evolved by telling each other stories and passing knowledge verbally. So we kind of we wired for storytelling. And if you can deliver your message as a story, as a successful, reliable, logical story with the beginning, middle, and the end, with some excitement or with some unexpected expectations, or you're going to be much more successful. So once you've done all this research and you figured all of your exciters and basic expectations, spend some time. It doesn't take a lot. Learn how to deliver the message well. And one of the most common mistakes I see when entrepreneurs try to talk about their product is this thing that also Stick describes as a book, called the curse of knowledge. And the nutshell of the curse of knowledge is it's very difficult to explain something that you are an expert in to somebody who is not, because you would tend to gloss over some basic things that you assume that are naturally understood by the other party that are not, and that's how you lose them, right?
I ran into this all the time in college. This was like university. This happens all the time. Yeah. Okay, I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk about how startups can compete and even outcompete larger companies that come with significant resources. How do you enter a relatively competitive market as a small company?
You know what, a lot of people, and I've worked at companies small and large, as large as 120,000 companies. I think what people underestimate is the ability of a small company to execute the large company for two reasons. Number one, they naturally move slower because there are more decision makers, there's more entropy.
Right.
And quite frankly, early on, in some markets, those problems are just not relevant to bigger companies, right? I've been to big companies for whom like a $35 million a year business is just like surrounding error on the budget somewhere. It's not interesting. And $35 million a year of SaaS business, it's probably in this day and age anywhere from half a billion to a billion. Valued company depending on your rate of growth. So there are certain markets where they just don't care, and you can find your niche. And if you catch the right wave, right, you can disrupt him, because if the markets are shifting, like if you're dealing with a disruptive innovation, right, where there's some fundamental shift happening in the market, uh, that's one way to compete with them. But you absolutely have to be execute, and you have to be incredibly efficient. One of my CEOs used to say that the right to innovate has to be earned, and you have to both innovate and execute, right? And I think one of the better examples of that is Nikola Tesla versus Edison, right?
Mhm.
Tesla was this incredible inventor who was super innovative, pushed for AC versus DC, and Edison knew how to execute. And once they combined forces at the end of the day, right, they've succeeded even more. But being innovative without ability to execute is absolutely worthless, and ability to execute on the wrong things is also absolutely not helpful in the long run. So you
Right.
have to have something that innovates, and you have to execute and out to execute a small company. I'll give you an example. At Taleo, in our mid market, we were able, from a moment a lead would submit a lead form to a moment where we would have a call and set up a demo and get a quote out, be faster than a lot of our larger competitors or other competitors would get to the first demo. Because in our case, the team was organized for speed,
Mhm.
and that was a differentiator. And we didn't have a separate sales engineer and a salesperson, an account manager, and an SDR who need to be on the same fold, coordinated to get this done, right? So you out execute those companies by being better at execution in some areas. You can also out execute those companies by being more flexible early on and understanding your market better. What other ways to compete with them? I don't have anything else that comes to mind, but those are the two that I've seen that work well.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a great point. I think one theme we've reached and talked about in this conversation is really understand your market. You have to be observing all the time in order to react, and it's really important to sort of take measurement and take stock of what's going on around you, especially when you're David fighting Goliath. You need
And
to take
having a
advantage.
product, maybe one other time, maybe one other conclusion out of this discussion is having a product that sells itself,
Hmm.
right? Having a product that is so well defined and so well implemented and fits the durable problems that your customers and your end users are facing, that it just sells. And it doesn't, by the way, and maybe that's a great example, doesn't necessarily mean you need better features. One of the, again, great examples in the mobile industry, right? In the smartphone industry is Apple versus the Apple ecosystem versus Android ecosystem. Apple has less capabilities and still able to command a lion's share of the profits of that industry by having a product that works, by having a product that meets the durable needs of the end users, right? And therefore being able to command the premium on the price.
Yeah, yeah, they really do have a tight grip on the market. So next, I would like to ask you about challenges, and we're wrapping up here, so we're almost done. But I would, before we finish, I'd like to ask you where do you think first time entrepreneurs typically struggle? Yeah, when it comes to bringing a product to market.
God, where do you begin? I think it will depend on I think it will depend on the entrepreneur, the background, and the kind of team. Maybe the best answer, the best way for me to answer this question is to tell you how I evaluate an investment pitch as an investor. Right? Do I understand what is the problem, and have you well articulated the problem that you're solving?
Can you tell stories?
Exactly. Can you tell me what the solution is, and why is that the right solution to that problem? Can you help me understand how big is the market, right? Is there 10 people or 100,000 people who will give you money? Can you help me understand your business model? How you're actually going to extract money out of the market? And this is an interesting one, do you have the team? And I'll talk about this concept of a team to execute and remove the obstacles that you need to remove in order to be successful with all four previous points that I've just shared with you. And when I talk about the team, obviously, when you start a company, unless you successful financially to the point where you don't need external capital and you can attract very experienced early set of founders, right? You typically have to cover some of your gaps, right? You may have deep product expertise, not deep go to market expertise. You may have some unique insight into a market because you've solved this problem at the big company before the rest of the market needed the solution, right? But the other mistake founders make is not under identifying those blind spots and not closing them or closing those gaps in their capabilities. Again, either with other strategic investors, also known as smart money, or advisors, right? To demonstrate that they have all the capabilities that they need to deliver on their mission. The other most common theme that I've seen when it comes to companies, and this happens more often when you have product founders, which it's a bit of a dichotomy because product founders long term tend to build better companies because at the end of the day, if you have a good product, then you go around distribution. If you have a crappy product, no amount of distribution will solve this, with some exceptions as any other rule. Is a lot of founder pitch a product, not a business, or they think about the company solution and what they build is a product, and product is incredibly important. But the question they forget to answer is there a business around it, right?
Hmm. Right.
Can you turn this great, amazing product that you've just built that has those unique insights into something people will give you a check for?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks. I mean, I think that's those are all really great points, especially for young entrepreneurs to hear from an investor what he's looking for when investing. All right, I guess to wrap up, is in your experience, this is my last question. In your experience, is there one key factor that drives the success of a new product? I mean, some good things you've already said include like building the right team and determining if that product has the demand. But in your estimation and your experience, is there one key factor driving the success of the product?
I don't think there's one. I've seen great products fail because they were too early, right? I think one of the great examples is a company Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz co-founded after Mosaic, LoudCloud, which was Amazon Web Services, AWS before AWS. It
Right.
was a great product. It just wasn't time for it, right?
Mm,
So that's an example of a great solution, bad timing. Sometimes you have crappy solutions, great timing, and they pick up because there are no alternatives, right?
right.
So I don't think there is one factor to lead them all, but I think the fundamentals of having a great product set you up for a higher degree of success than any other facts that I've seen that, or any other factors that contribute to the company's success.
All right. Well, we're going to end it right there. Thank you so much, Leonid, for joining and sharing your thoughts. We hope to have you back soon.
Same here. Thank you very much for having me.